Thank you so much, Nan, and thank you everyone for joining us. One of the things that um, I've been struck by in my time here at the Stam School is just how incredibly diverse all of you are, as people in your own orientations towards your creative practice, and more importantly, the kinds of creative paths that you have taken in your lives and career paths that are so different from each other. And the aim of this session is really to try and highlight those creative trajectories that you have taken, the kinds of differences that you have pursued in your own lives, but also provide an opportunity, therefore, to highlight what were some of the things that actually made it possible for you to get to those creative pathways. What were some of the key things that you did that help you along in reaching those kinds of goals? And so this is really an opportunity for us to hear from the four panelists, but also to engage in a larger conversation with all of you to get a sense of what are the things that click, that tick, that make you pursue the kinds of things that you have pursued in your lives. And so today we have for the discussion, the panel discussion itself, we have Elizabeth, Maria, Joseph, and Ilan. And we could not have chosen a very as different a group of people with very different career pathways, having come to the arts and then left it, done different things, and then still essentially keeping that creative spirit that actually drives them. I presume you would have noticed in the opening slides the kind of careers that they have pursued. So what we are going to do now is to get each of them to say a bit about their own creative trajectories, and then we will take it from there. So we'll start with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you started your career in digital communications and then later moved on to UX design and worked at Google and YouTube. And then your path from then onwards seems to have taken you to a different area now with Facebook in relation to social impact. I was intrigued by this whole idea of social impact and what exactly drove you there, and what are some of the things that keep you interested in that. So could you speak to that specifically, but also more generally about your own career path since you graduated, and also a bit about your role at Y Combinator now in relation to advising startups?
Sure. So thank you for having me. And also thanks for the opportunity to even sort of think about career path, because I don't think I had looked back kind of on the decisions that I had made in this light before. So thank you for that opportunity. I think, so when I graduated from Michigan, it was 2001, and web design was kind of just becoming a thing at the time. And I was very much enjoying how to take kind of fundamental graphic design principles that I had learned and translate them into a web environment. But I quickly realized that I had absolutely no idea how the decisions that I were making were actually impacting the people who were using the websites that I was building. And that kind of became a cornerstone that definitely pushed me in the direction of UX, which was that I really wanted to make sure the decisions that I was making actually benefited the people who were using the websites and the products that I was building. So I think kind of being curious about that and focusing on that is something that drove me to Google. And I think, I don't know exactly how much detail to go in, but I think jumping to the second part of your question, which was around social impact, I think there have been a bunch of decisions that I have made, some of which were more intentional than others, some of which are probably better than others. But I think a couple things that guided me throughout the time was really the people who I was working with and that I've definitely made decisions based on the people who I would get to interact with. I really have enjoyed bringing design into a conversation amongst engineers and data and product, and kind of figuring out ways to sort of synthesize all of our goals into building a product that people will love to use. And also have made decisions just based on being excited about the product space, or the challenges or opportunities that were there. And others just because they seemed like they would push me in different directions that I'd be excited to grow. With social impact, I was working in Facebook just on kind of core, what we would call consumer products, but things like profile, local, events, privacy. And the company made an announcement that they were going to be investing in building a team around social impact, or really leveraging a seventh of humanity that was already on the platform to do good for the world. And that I found super inspiring, because it wasn't just, kind of trying to make designs that would and build products that would really benefit people, but also then how people could take those products and benefit humanity, right? Or kind of do good for humanity. And so that was and that kind of set me in a trajectory. I wouldn't really consider it a departure or a huge pivot, as much as sort of kind of a sort of evolution, or kind of a next step in what how I wanted to spend my time doing design work. And then currently, I am just working across a bunch of startups, either kind of helping companies shape the products, the core products that they're building, or figuring out how to build out a design team, make key hires in the design space. And so it's kind of touching several different companies in sort of smaller, lighter weight ways.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. And it's good to hear that, you don't see these as a fundamental departure from your interest in social impact and the kinds of work you've done before. And also it's interesting to hear also that you're thinking about it in terms of how to connect different kinds of disciplines and people who are working in different fields for the kinds of objectives that you are focused on. So it was good to hear that. Ilan, you are now the executive creative director for the city of New York, and I can only imagine the struggles and the challenges of restoring tourism after the pandemic. This must be very busy days for you now. You have been a creative director for many other companies, including MoMA, Interbands, J&J, just to name a few. So what I was curious about for you, Ilan, is how art and design students and alums can consider using their creativity and education throughout all types of industries, which you have seemed to have found your way into. And how did you do it, and how does one think about doing it? And can you also talk a bit about how you got to what you're doing right now, and any advice that you think would be helpful to our students, other alums who are thinking about some of these fields right now?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. The short answer is I didn't plan any of it. I just knew that I was a designer. I knew I was a designer even before I knew the word, when I was a little kid. So, for me, oddly enough, coming to Michigan was a rebellion against knowing I was going to be a designer. So I got in through art and design. And what the wonderful thing about the university is that I spent a lot of time at taking all sorts of classes, from mysticism classes to English classes to film classes to this and that. And design, it helped me. I came up when it was the graphic design industry, so it was a very different curriculum than that. It was very much tactical. It was very much about the skill set and the technique. What is typography? What is design? Design a wine label. It wasn't. It was it sort of was really kind of cast in its blue collar roots as a, you know, like commercial art. But it was also not too long before the graphic design, you know, graphic design as an industry. When I got out of school, it was, let's see, it was 92, there's a big recession on, and it was really sort of right before the web came along. So I sort of had this like Leonard Zelig like kind of trajectory where as graphic design started to fade away and morph into, I remember we were talking about things like, what is service design? What is digital design? What do we call it? What is experiential design? And these are the dialogues that were happening in AIGA at the time. And so for me, it wasn't so much like planning. I mean, first of all, when I got out of school, I was really young, really immature, and all I wanted to do was be a design rock star, like, you know, Mike Mills or Jeffrey Keaton at MTV or Hollis King. You know, I worshipped Blue Note, I worshipped Hatch Show Print, and all that type of stuff. But I think that, you know, when I actually did have an interview at MTV, and MTV at the time was like the place you wanted to go. That was absolutely hands down, like, if you got a job at MTV, you were it. And because I had such a wide focus at school, I didn't really have much of a portfolio. I had no idea what you know, here I am, no portfolio, but with a lot of other kind of experience, going into New York City, like the toughest market in the world ever. And basically, this is no reflection on the University of Michigan or the art school. It was more of a reflection on me, which was Jeffrey Keaton said, you might want to go back to school. And so what that did was, that was sort of my first experience with, okay, so I have all this knowledge, I have all this understanding from all of the other classes I took in addition to design. I didn't know quite where I fit. And so that really was sort of the trajectory for me, was a little bit of a misfit outcast. You know, I was in a market with these people who were, even from my own school, even from art and design, like they had these beautiful portraits or portfolios. But I was like constantly, I was omnivorously curious about so many different things. So I'm going to fast forward. So I got into, you know, when the .com era happened, I left the small studio I was at, and I started up a company with a buddy of mine, and we did sort of these multimedia experiences and presentations, like long before the infrastructure was capable of supporting it. And so we went through that. We went through .bomb, and I found myself having basically had this digital entrepreneurial experience, but again, no portfolio. Like I came out of my own company and we weren't even really doing web. We were doing something that didn't really have a definition. And so I found myself at that first point, of which I've had a couple, where I just had to stop and say, what do I want to do? And I sort of thought to myself, you know what, I need to get back into typography, design, the basics, and get my hands dirty. And so the Museum of Modern Art showed up on my radar. And I thought initially like, oh, I don't know if I want that job or whatever. But anyway, it turned out turned into a very, like, again, getting my hands dirty, getting back to basics. I was just a graphic designer. Even though I had about 10 years experience at that point, I just wanted to get back to basics. Got paid nothing, you know, ate beans and rice. But it was incredible because I was there at a moment in time when they were redesigning the entire building, the entire experience, the entire structure. So this is 2004. And so that was a first hint at, again, like, what is everything that's going on in the realm of design around me that's crossing by my desk? So I think this starts to be this notion of like, pick your head up and what's happening. What can you do as a designer? And so I got to work on the architecture. I got to work on the architectural signage. I got to get my hands dirty with Matthew Carter and recut, you know, fonts and work with Yoshio Taniguchi on understanding sort of the spatial qualities of graphic design and wayfinding. And then I got to do things. That was the first moment where I started to also realize what is the physical impact of design. So we constantly did these gigantic vinyl banners advertising our shows, and vinyl is about the worst thing that you can possibly use. So I started up a partnership with Freitag, and we started to create these Freitag bags. So basically, it's from there. That job could have just been me doing exhibition ads, but because of this kind of curiosity and because of this misfit outcast kind of point of view, I just started to dip my toes into everything possible. 4 years later, after starting, it was a great run. It was a wonderful place. Museum of Modern Art has always been my home. I grew up going there. My mom took me there every month. And so it was a dream. At about that point where the dream started to get a little repetitive, I got contacted by a guy named Chris Hacker, who told me he was going to start the design group at J&J, Johnson & Johnson. I hated packaging. I never wanted to get involved in packaging. To me, it was sort of I had some pretty strong judgments about it, but the next stage in this kind of like curiosity addiction was understanding through this guy, Chris Hacker, who is brilliant. Don't hate anything that you can change. You know, if you don't like how something is done, that doesn't mean you have to do it that way. It means that you have an obligation as a designer to step in and try to do it differently. And so that became a huge thing. So we started this global outfit called the Global Strategic Design Office. And I headed up all sorts of brands. The highlight was redesigning KY, for example, which was a ridiculously hilarious and fun project. But really what it came down to there was understanding both the impact as a designer, but also understanding, Elizabeth, you mentioned working with engineers on the digital side. The best partnerships I had were the physical engineers, the package engineers, because I would always design better with them, be like, you know, I want this thing to be made this way. How do we do this? And they would tell me about the restrictions of the machinery and the materials and all that. We pushed everything to the limit. And so, you know, getting into engineering, getting into that also I got into, that was my first experience with sort of creative and critical thinking about brand, about what I now call narrative design, which is what is the narrative that underlies the products and the brands and the experiences that we have. I went around the world doing innovation projects, and I worked with incredible people. And that was about 6 years. So now there are sort of these two areas that I never thought I would do, in, you know, working in the museum and then working for an international packaging company. And then, you know, it was time to move on. I made a mistake, and I will tell this to everybody that I made a mistake, which was, you know, there seems to be a lot of money in this advertising world. So I think I'm going to go to advertising. I got an obnoxious salary from the advertising agency that I went to. And I realized very quickly there's a reason why I never went into advertising, is because the whole milieu was not like going from a very thoughtful and very investigative and very humane and very sort of sincere organization like the design office at J&J, where we were very human focused, to advertising, which was about how many cans of Budweiser can we get people to drink, was completely just a complete culture shock for me. And so that was another thing that I started to understand. And again, to the original question of like, what's the trajectory of my career? Sort of realized very quickly, like, I really have to give a shit about what I'm working on. Because I had been working at Museum of Modern Art and then at J&J for these really good products, I'd never been tested on that. It didn't even occur to me that that was important because I was already doing it. So I became sort of a journeyman freelance designer, but so much more. It became much more about sort of strategy and design thinking and design narratives. And I spent some time with SY partners who I met when they did some work with us at J&J, you know, redesign the business. We actually designed vision for JetBlue. I worked at Co-Collective, where we completely redesigned the business of Infinity Motors. And that kind of had nothing to do with design the way that I was taught, again, which was typography and art direction and all that. This was now like asking questions like, what does it mean to an automobile industry when nobody wants to buy automobiles? And so that was that trajectory. And then finally, it was very much in the sort of think space and the brainstorming space. Ultimately, about, 5 years of that, I started to get really, that was the second time that I got to a point where like, I really don't like not producing stuff, because for all of this innovation thinking, most of it never gets done. There's great ideas, but a lot of barriers to producing the ideas. So then I took a pause. I just sort of stopped and I said, again, I want to do something that I love. I want to get back to my basics. Taking everything that I've learned. And then I found this role at NYC and Company, which was the tourism board, which is the tourism board for the city of New York. And I'm a diehard New Yorker. I mean, I've been here for 30 years. My family goes back here, blue collar workers, immigrants for a couple generations. And New York City has always been, I've been to, I don't even know how many cities in the world and places in the world, but New York City has always been it. And it took a couple of minutes for me to open my eyes and say, wow, this is it. This is what I want to do now. I want to tell stories about New York City to the world. I want to bring people to my hometown. And so where I am now is, before COVID, it was this effort of let's help people experience the city in the right way, rather than shove more and more people into Times Square. What does it mean to be a visitor? What does it mean to be a local? What does it mean to be a host? We did projects with another university that had they had this innovation program where we worked with the students. This is something that the dean and I had spoke about doing potentially with Michigan, where it was, what is the future of tourism? What does it mean to be a visitor in a time when tourism is taking over the world? And then enter COVID, and that all turned around. So what got me through everything, and I'll bring a very long story to a very short end, has been this notion of narrative design, right? So thinking, writing, words being as important. I think I'm wired that way, but I also don't think that I would have had that kind of affinity had I not, all the way back in the beginning in Michigan, gone to Michigan really knowing that I was going to be a designer, but gone to Michigan understanding like there's design, but God, there's a whole constellation of all these other courses. So addiction to curiosity and narrative and all that, that's been the theme.
Thank you, Ilan. Well, one thing is clear, not having a plan is not going to bog you down as long as you have curiosity. So thank you for that valuable lesson. Maria, so you started in art and design, and then you moved on to an MBA at Ross School here at Michigan. And then your career has spanned across a whole range of things in design, finance, even advanced technologies with advanced batteries and fuel cells. So you are currently now as a venture partner at Arsenal, and you are also entrepreneur in residence at the Zell Lurie Institute here. So you're focused on building and investing in businesses. And so, how did your early experiences in art and design shape some of the perspectives that you are bringing to the roles that you have right now and that the roles you have played before?
Well, much like Ilan said, it was a great segue into what we do, because design is much bigger than just, my undergraduate degree was in industrial and graphic design. And I learned that the whole design way of thinking was actually just as important for developing a small business and creating new technologies as the MBA was, because it's a way of thinking. It's a way of asking questions of why is something like this? How can it be better? So I started out designing office furniture for Steelcase after I graduated. I also graduated in a recession, so it was tough finding a job, and I was thrilled to be able to be designing office furniture. But after a while, you get tired of designing binder bins, and you're thinking of the office for the future, and all these big ideas, but reality sets in. But it was fun working with marketing people and with engineers, because design and creative process it encompasses so much more than just something that you sketch out on a piece of paper. It's asking questions: how can we make this better? How can we make the processes better? So that level of thinking led me to want to go to get an MBA, because I wanted to be the person leading those discussions, making those decisions. And after I graduated with my MBA in marketing, I worked at IBM for several years, which is a great training ground for a lot of entrepreneurs have come out of IBM, because you learn how to sell. And it's important, because when you have your own company, I used to say everybody is a salesman, because you have to be able to sell the idea. You have to be able to tell the story that makes sense to people. And that also involves a great deal of creativity, and problem solving. How do I reach the audience across the table, be it a consumer or somebody who is going to make a decision whether or not they're going to give your company a contract. So then after I left IBM to start our own company, my husband's a chemical engineer. He was a chemical engineering professor at Michigan, and my background was business. And we started the company together, developing advanced materials. So we're developing materials that didn't exist for markets that were emerging, which is a tough place to be. I don't know why we picked a tough problem, but it was interesting for us. So we were developing advanced materials and fuel cells for what was then the idea of an emerging electric vehicle car market. And now you have electric vehicles who are really becoming more ubiquitous because of the whole autonomy. And you have vehicles that will be able to drive without the driver being actively engaged. There's a whole lot of electronics that need distributed power systems, but all that takes a lot of creativity. And then when you look to start your own company, I've heard some people have entrepreneurship and working with entrepreneurs, you get an opportunity to design the company to be the way you want it to be. How do people work together? How do you create an innovative environment where people aren't afraid to fail, so they can come up with the next generation? We're not doing just incremental improvements. We're trying to come up with something new. So those questioning, those processes of how you go through the design thinking were stuff that I learned at Michigan in the art school. And that helped us be a successful business just as much, if not more so, than the MBA. Because you can always hire an accountant, you can hire a lawyer, you can hire marketing people. It's much harder to find people who can think outside the box. So we came up with a new way to interview people. But maybe it's not a new way, but our way of interviewing people, which went through a lot of different processes, so that everybody was involved with. Because when you're a small company, you add a person, it can change the whole culture. So the whole questions of culture, how do we want to be, how do people want to be treated, all that was a design project. And then when you're coming up with new materials, that's a big design project. So the thinking that I learned at Michigan, and Alan Samuels was my industrial design professor, great professor, lifelong lessons that have carried me throughout the career. It was interesting. Our company was acquired by another company that ended up going public. And they said, wow, you created so much with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. And they said it in a negative way. Okay. And I remember even in business school, people would say, oh, she has a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. And they'd almost want to talk over you until they realized that you were a good student and that you could tell the story and create the good presentations. But we were successful because of that. And people tend to kind of poo-poo the design thinking, but it allowed us to create things in an environment where people could soar. I'm very proud that many of our employees have gone on to start their own companies and are very successful. And so I think, that's what the Michigan design education meant to me. And I still do fine arts. I mean, I paint silk scarves, I still do paintings. Everything, that you look at, you're trying to come up with the creative way of thinking outside the box.
Well, it's interesting that both you and Ilan talk about storytelling and narrativizing, and that seems to be a key skill, and you'll be happy to know that we emphasize at the school strong levels of writing. We students are doing multiple years of writing, and we are also really proud that our students are exceptionally good storytellers in many ways. So thank you, Maria. Next is Joseph. Joseph, you are currently artist in residence at Dartmouth's Hopkins Center for the Arts, and you are also busy with performances in NPR's Tiny Desk concerts, and you have a show coming up, or is it on right now, at Little Islands, New York City Free. So you have struck me as one of those highly interdisciplinary people who came to the university with that strong interest, and then have shined throughout. So could you tell me a bit about? Could you tell us a bit about what attracted you to Michigan and our program? You did the Inter Arts Performance program, but what was it that were you already interdisciplinary and you came here because of that, or was it the other way around, that you became much more interdisciplinary as a result of this? What were some of the things that drove you to us and drove you beyond us?
Yes. So my mind is the reckless path of the independent artist, and I was from Michigan. I came from Southwest Michigan. To be honest, I applied to University of Michigan, and that was one attractive plan. And the other attractive plan for me was to move to Seattle and be in a band with my cousin, who was still in high school at the time. I would have had a different trajectory if that had occurred. But I think it's for the best that I was accepted. And so I came into this, I came into the school. I knew that I had a couple different interests, that I was interested in cultivating my interests in music and in art. I was ostensibly a painting major at the school. I wasn't actually part of the Inter Arts program, but I was kind of a prototype for the Inter Arts student, I think. So I came into the school at a time of transition for the school. They were revising the curriculum and for the studio art classes, and I think it was really to my good fortune that it was a time of transition. So I came into the strange situation of certain classes that were supposed to be requirements actually not being available, which for me gave me a little bit more flexibility and freedom to do other things and to kind of design my own course of study, and which might not have made sense from the outside, but made some kind of sense to me. So I remember also kind of petitioning to, I knew I wasn't going to be a sculptor. I knew I didn't really need to do three-dimensional work, and so there was a 3D requirement that I could have fulfilled, but I convinced the associate dean. I said, can I take voice lessons as my sculpture credit? It's 4-dimensional, and somehow that was convincing. And so I really got to. I did study painting. I studied performance art under Holly Hughes, and that kind of. I was already doing writing. It was just, both my parents are not by profession writers, but by practice, and that was something that was very natural to me. And so I started developing narratives, storytelling, things that, but kind of coming out of the tradition of the visual tradition, and different people who had used narrative and their own bodies and their identities, etc., in the context of performance, and really approaching performance as a container for my particular interests, and a certain permission to, okay, I want to sing, I want to, and write and do these different things, and it's all kind of performance. And I was studying as an opera singer at the same time in the music school under George Shirley, and I was, so I kind of ended up really, which it was very formative, actually, the experience at University of Michigan for me, and for the way I've carried on, which is that I wanted to develop some of the skills that are of an interpretive performer, but my head was always in the space of a generative artist. So the conceptual interests, and a certain kind of criticality that really was rooted in visual art and in the art school. So my course of study was very interdisciplinary, and I also just, I immersed myself in, like, I went to every stamped weekly lecture before they were required, before it had grown into what it is now. It was still in a little lecture hall on North Campus, and so I feel like I really, made the most of things in my way while I was there, and I wouldn't have been able to do that at a different place, and I wouldn't have had the flexibility or the resources. I moved to New York immediately after. Well, I spent a couple months in my parents' basement, but then I moved to New York, and I got a job at the Guggenheim for $8 an hour hawking audio guides in the daytime for a few months, and started performing in operas in this little opera house in the East Village at night, and then was performing in clubs and generating my own weird theatrical concoctions. And I proceeded in this sort of what might look like a kind of spaghetti at the wall artistic performance practice, where I was and really really kind of being in multiple places at once. I mean, being kind of in the classical music world, but then also in the club world, and also in the art world, but they didn't necessarily, not in a gallery way or anything, but performing performing in art events and things. So I developed, and publishing little essays or writing about visual art, so I really tried to honor my own impulses, pursue this strange path, and for several years I would have little part-time day jobs that hopefully were flexible and were colorful and provided me lots of material as well, and then gradually I was able to make a living as an independent artist, and still my path is very, very strange, and I think that the features of my work that interest people are also the features that confuse people or make it a little hard for me to be contextualized. I mean, even pre-pandemic, it was like 2019. I had two premieres of original performances that were kind of in the contemporary performance world and opera festivals. And then I did a run at a club in London, and then I was the national support act for the rock band Slater Kinney across the U.S. And so I've gotten to have all these really exciting experiences, and also be constantly shifting my point of view and testing my work, often the same work, in different contexts and different economies, and being able to sort of look at it with different sets of concerns. So, you know, I lead a fluid and tenuous but exciting existence.
Joseph, you talked about yourself as a reckless, independent artist. I can tell you we are all richer as a result of your recklessness. So thank you. So thank you, everyone, for all the panelists for their presentations. What we're going to do next is to move to breakout rooms, and I think Nan and her team are going to be talking to us about it. But I wanted to just say a few things in summary from what I'm hearing. You know, the stories of perseverance, persistence, the fact that curiosity drove a lot of your interests and your pursuits, the fact that some of you did not have plans, but you were willing to play along and realize things that about yourself that you did not know about. These are all wonderful things that we think that exemplifying good artists and designers. And you know, it's we are glad to hear that these were things that drove you and to the kinds of successes that you've had in your lives and your careers. And so, Nan, do you want to
Sure.
give them the guidance on the next stage?
Yep. So in a few minutes, you'll be broken out into breakout sessions where each of our panelists will be moderating. So you'll have the opportunity to ask them any additional questions. I know that there were a few in the chat. So feel free to use that time to ask those additional questions. But we also want to use it as an opportunity for you to share your experiences as well as students, and maybe talk about what was instrumental when you were on campus as an art and design student in your own creative trajectory, and some of the things that were hallmarks in, you know, making you in defining, you know, how you moved along your paths, and some themes that you think that you know, are sort of important for us to hear and to know. We will have a staff member in each of the rooms to help moderate those conversations and facilitate as well if you're having any difficulties with the rooms. With that, we'll spend about 5 minutes or so in those rooms. Does anyone have any questions that I can answer? I'll look for hand. I'll try and page through with hands. If you want to just go ahead and ask them, please feel free. Right. No questions? Okay, great. So Melissa and Alex, can you help break us out into rooms? And Melissa's also posted some questions in the chat that you can use to help guide your conversation. Take care. We'll see you soon.
It looks like we've had continuation of the conversations way outside of the break rooms, but I hope that you had some good discussions in your own groups. We had an amazing conversation and learned a lot about each of us. Would some of the groups like to, some of the people from the different groups like to just share maybe 1 or 2 insights that came up just for the benefit of the larger group? Ilan, do you want to share what happened in your group?
Yeah, I think it was, it kind of came back to trajectories, which Harris Ahmad studied you said biology. You're a biology major, but now you're a lawyer and
I'm a lawyer
writer.
and an entrepreneur. Yeah.
Lawyer and an entrepreneur with a biology background, which I think is kind of fascinating. Sarah Buckius has started a company that is helping children connect with outside spaces, which is interesting.
Ilan seems to be going in and out.
Eileen Wacker is the mother of a student. I apologize for that. Can you guys hear me now?
Yep, we can.
Yeah, I have a terrible internet connection. I apologize for that. I think that the main theme is that we all go to school thinking, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And the ability to just know that, like, you have no idea where you're going to be 2 years out of school or 20 years out of school. And that's kind of magic. Because I know a lot of miserable people who have stuck with that one thing because they felt like they had to. And I think ultimately as designers, if you've got a design heart and a design mind, you're a drifter, right? You're an outsider. And that's to be celebrated. So that's sort of what I got the sense of in our group, is how much change happens over the course of time. Yet at the same time, as long as you have certain basic skills to fall back on, like the critical thinking or the narrative design, or the desire to listen to and tell stories and make stories, that's kind of what it's all about.
Thanks, Ilan. Anyone else? Joseph, do you want to share what happened in your group? If there are some interesting things that came up? You're muted.
All right, here I am, I think. Yeah, similarly, we talked about trajectories, and we shared different experiences and paths, and we tried to see if anybody had set out with a plan that was realized just as conceived, and no one emerged. So, and we also talked about curriculum, different approaches, and what are the virtues of being in an art college, in a university setting, being an autodidact. So these different considerations also kind of came up a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Joseph. I'm just looking at the time. It's 2:27. Nan, do you think I can close? What do you think?
Yeah, Guna, I think we can, if no one has any last burning comments, we can
Yeah, if
go
anyone
ahead
has a burning comment, why don't we do that?
Thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you, Julie. Well, look, I think that one of the things that I'm constantly surprised by, pleasantly surprised by, as I've met our alums and I regularly meet our students and hear about what they are thinking about, is that we in the creative field are really versatile people. Versatility is an important part of who we are as people, and that's what allows us to succeed even when we don't have a plan, succeed even when our plans don't actually work out the way we wanted to, succeed because we actually have a persistence and a perseverance that allows us to know what we value and go after that with a certain amount of verve and drive. And each time I meet with our alums and hear your stories and your creative trajectories, as much as some of the different directions you might have taken might have surprised you at different points. I think that what I heard from many of you is when you look back, every part of that journey, every side steps you made, every different routes that you took seems to have led you where you are today. And I'm proud of everything that many of you have achieved and will continue to achieve. And I take pride in the fact that we have an amazing group of people who continue to make the world a better place because of who they are and the kind of creative energies that they bring to the world. Uh, we are going to end the session, but I wanted to stress again, please keep in touch. And we will be able to, I think someone asked about LinkedIn connections. I think we can easily do that. We will find a way to make sure that all of you have an opportunity to connect with each other, especially those who are in the same groups or beyond. I really think that that's the primary objective of these sessions. Is not only for us to get to know you, but for you to get to know each other and make those meaningful connections. And so thank you again for participating, and please stay connected. And I do hope at some point we will get to see each other and share a meal in person. So thank you very much. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.